Good morning to everybody. I am Alessandra Venturini, the holder of the Jean Monnet Chair on European Migration Studies, hosted by the University of Torino and financed by the European Commission. I'm very glad to start today the third lecture of the Satellite Seminar on Consumption of Cultural Goods as Driver of Migrant Integration. Cocumint is the acronym of this seminar. We are very happy and honored that Victoria Ateca-Amestoy has accepted to deliver this lecture. And I leave Enrico Bertacchini, who is a colleague of Economic of Culture at the University of Torino, the privilege to introduce her, even if it is so well known that she does not need an introduction. Enrico.
Thank you, Alessandra. And yes, as you said, it is my privilege to introduce Victoria Ateca-Amestoy, who is a professor in economics at the University of the Basque Country. She is a cultural economist that has a very broad experience, professional experience and research interest in cultural economics, but especially in cultural consumption and behavior in leisure. She is part of the Cultural Policy Compendium initiative, which is a very interesting project to update about cultural policies over European countries. And she's also part of the Cultural Observatory of the La Caixa Foundation in Spain. I give the floor to Victoria Ateca-Amestoy for this very new lecture of the Cocumint series. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Ateca, and I'm very happy to be here in this seminar in order to introduce some economic insights about cultural heritage and also to bring here probably some insights about that's the end of it, yeah. That's the end of the presentation, right? So this means that hopefully we will finish in time and we will have time for some questions. So when dealing with cultural participation, I would like to start defining broadly what it's about, how to measure it, how to analyze it, but bringing the insights and the tools of the economist. And at some point, I would like to introduce what we know so far and where the challenges are. So when talking about this cultural participation, for sure, I would say that economists must recognize that this is a broader concept than demand, right? So when we talk about the demand for any economic goods, we are just considering relationships and how quantities demanded in order to be consumed, are going to be depending on prices and these sort of things. But here, participation wants to capture a wider scope of ways of engagement with cultural content. So many times we talk about cultural participation and cultural engagement, and we mean the same phenomena. So there are different ways of measuring, and the economic approach to cultural participation is mostly empirical. What we know is what we learn from looking at the data, from organizing those data, from asking those data if someone of some particular group participates more than the other, and then asking questions why. Why is it so that we observe differences in behavior and we apply quantitative and theoretical models that want to explain the very foundations of choice. So this economic approach to analyze cultural participation is going to be the object of the thread that will be in this presentation. I would also like to comment on some results and some words on differences by ethnic groups, religion, nationality, or particular groups. So here, demand and participation, how they relate, and what we are talking about when we talk about demand, being economist, and what we refer to when talking about cultural participation, also as economist. So, well, first, think that you as a consumer, as an individual, have some taste for culture. And this means that you have to produce and enjoy something that would be cultural experiences, right? And this is going to be a simple example in order to say that buying a book right? This could be demand for books, but buying a book is good and it's demand for a book, but it can be rather useless if you're not going to read it, right? So explaining the differences in demand for books for Alessandra and Enrico, one would think that the quantity that they demand and they are actually buying is a function of the price of that book, the price of substitutes. There can be close substitutes there in the bookstore, or you can find close substitutes like saying, what if instead of a book it's a record, or what if instead of a book it's going to be a ticket for the movies, the price of complements, right, and income. But then this means that, well, you can see that I'm a heavy reader. This is one of my bookshelves. But some of those books are rather useless because they have not been read yet. So in order to have this reading experience and to have a pleasant experience out of any of those books, I need all the variables. And I need variables, for instance, if I've got here Le Città Invisibili. This is my piece of cake, Italo Calvino, but I've got my Italian books are in this part and I don't have the skills, right, to enjoy them as much as if I were reading Las Ciudades Invisibles or in Spanish, yeah? So, and also I need time availability, right? It's not only the 20 euros that I paid for this edition when I traveled to Italy, but it's most likely the 40 hours that, because I'm not very skillful speaking Italian, I would have to spend there in order to enjoy, right? So you can think about this reading experience, reading books, but it's all the same when you go to a concert of classical music, when you play yourself music in a band, or when you are tweeting about a concert or watch the streaming of that concert. So since we want to talk about cultural participation in this migration framework, we should take into account that many times we are having a very Eurocentric perspective. So much better if we rely, for instance, on UNESCO, who is taking care of representing the whole diversity of countries and cultures in the world. So UNESCO defines something which is called the cultural cycle. And the cultural cycle, no matter if we are considering the fact that I am playing an instrument and I am creating something new, or that I'm reproducing the music written by someone, but and I am enjoying it at the same time, or if I am attending a concert, if I am attending this concert live or now via streaming, everything starts with something which is called creation, and appears here, right? Creation here. It can be the la 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 that is in my head as a composer, and everything finishes with consumption and participation. Of course, the number of stages that are between this first creation and last consumption participation is heavily determined by business models, by value chains, and digitization here has broken many of these intermediate stages. There are people that are writing and are editing themselves. So this production, dissemination, exhibition has become sometimes really compressed, right? Or you can skip rather those. So cultural participation in terms of UNESCO, the UNESCO framework for cultural statistics refers to these activities of audiences and participants that are associated with the consumption or participation in cultural activities and experiences. This thing of experience is really useful when analyzing. And then there is an example, reading books, dance, take part in carnivals, listen to the radio, visit art galleries. EUROSTAT, in terms of the European Union, has a different and somehow more progressive, of course, taking care of what's the reality that is represented in EU27 now, plus UK, Norway, and typically the countries that are covered by EUROSTAT statistics. And this is the ICET model. Each of these stands for each of the 4 forms in which participation can take place. I goes for information. Oh, sorry, this was left in somehow Spanish English. So this is information. C stands for communication and community. E stands for enjoyment and expression, and T stands for transaction. So this ICT model is somehow a bit more fine-tuned in order to capture alternative ways of participation nowadays in the context of European countries, such as buying or buying goods, booking goods, also enjoying these experiences, creating online content. The examples come from the ICT version of the model itself, right? So this is somehow different. But what is there is that cultural experiences and cultural participation and cultural engagement are the object of the study of cultural economists. And we have challenges directly. First one is heterogeneity. We have been defined and put in a list which is not exhaustive, but you can see that there are many things over there. But what is common ground is the fact that any of these ways of cultural engagement is useful because they create meaningful and enjoyable cultural experiences. So we would like to know now what leads a person to choose one way or another to satisfy this cultural experience, and what we can learn from cultural economic analysis. So when thinking about cultural analysis, we are the heirs, we are the sons of the economic approach to human behavior of Gary Becker, and in many dimensions. The first one is household production functions, considering for the first time that this sort of experiences are typically created and enjoyed at some communitarian level, at least the household level. Also time allocation, right? Time is scarce, time is universally allocated. We all start our day with 24 hours ahead. And also the rational addiction model. The rational addiction, because somehow the first economists faced the change, like saying, why is it so that if there is one common principle, which is diminishing marginal utility, that the more that you eat of something, the less happier you are, or the less additionally happier you are very happy when you are starving and you get your first food of the day. But once that you have eaten quite a lot, probably eating something a bit more or the same additional unit of something, even if you like it a lot, is not leading you to the same increase in happiness. And this does not happen, or apparently this does not happen with good music. The more good music you listen, the more you want, right? So this was handled by rational addiction and learning by consuming, which is another a derivation of these sort of models. But we are the sons of Gary Becker. So what's this with this production and enjoyment of cultural experiences? So we have to recognize that leisure is some common basic human need. And this is treated in economic analysis, considering first, well, leisure makes you happy. Working in the market is less leisure. This will make you unhappy, but well, you have to go and work and buy and get your wage such that you will have some way of living. And time is limited. We have all the same time, but not the same allocation or the same endowment, but not the same capacity to transform this time into money. So the price of leisure time, it's going to be the opportunity cost of time, right? And this opportunity cost of time could be approximately measured by differences in wage, but also in differences of committed time, right? If you are doing childcare, then discretionary time is going to shrink. If you are having some other duties, then your discretionary time, which is the time, not only time out of the market, but time where you have the freedom to decide what you want to do and you want to engage in one leisure activity or the other, then this is somehow limited. And then these households are sort of firms, right? Using resources of the members being combined in order to satisfy the needs. Sometimes there are public goods. Think about shelter. Someone is paying the housing and then we all are together, but some others are absolutely private, such as dress. And the arguments, the economic approach to human behavior by Gary Becker and how it differs from a typical example or demand for books, as we presented before, is that here, the arguments of the utility function, this is not good one, good two, as you took probably in your microeconomic classes some time ago, but there are commodities, and these commodities are related to these basic satisfiers. So just a brief overview of the model. This is a question of choosing among the Z, which are the commodities, the basic human satisfiers, which are somehow like a short list, like shelter, food, sleep, leisure, appearance and these sort of things. And in order to produce each of these levels of satisfiers, households are combining goods and services. So the first thing that is typical for leisure is first what's called the first person criterion. And this means that unlike some other commodities, let's say food, here with leisure, you have to be the one producing and enjoying it at the same time. Whereas for food or for childcare, I can pay a cook or I can pay someone to babysit my kids. And then this means that the opportunity cost of time is going to be crucial in order to explain differences or in behavior of cultural participation. Then we have that some of these commodities are more intensive in time with respect to market goods. And what happens is that cultural leisure specifically is very intensive in time. Sometimes you need it to be synchronous time and in human capital. Right? Human capital, which are the skills, the way of referring to the skills that are needed in order to be productive, transforming market goods, let's say books, records, tickets to the cinema, and so on, with time in order to have meaningful cultural experiences. And why should it be synchronic? First, because in many dimensions, cultural participation is highly social. If I want to go to the movies with my friends have to be there. If I want to play in a rock and roll band, I need my time to be synchronous with the other members of the band. But also when having this going out in dimension, it has to be synchronic in the sense that if the movies go at 8 and 10, those are the possibilities. If I have free time at 6 p.m., this is absolutely useless for this purpose, right? So results, well, we have that cultural goods and services, some have market prices, so we go to observe that differences in market prices should explain differences in participation. But in order to determine what's the price of cultural experiences, we have a challenge, because it's not only a market price, but it's also the combination with time, with the opportunity cost. So it has what we economists call shadow prices. And shadow prices should be some combination of market prices and opportunity cost. And if we observe differences in behavior, this is not so much about differences first in prices, but of full prices, because, well, you may think, but everyone in our city is facing that the price of a ticket for the cinema is exactly the same. Yes, but probably because of the opportunity cost and the shadow price of that time that you need to go to the cinema, you can explain that the shadow price of cinema going as a way of creating meaningful cultural experiences is different. So this framework allows us to explain the differences in levels of cultural participation at the individual level. And then it happens that, well, for particular social groups, they behave in quite a homogeneous way. We have that we can think about these differences in the market prices, differences in the opportunity cost for different collectives, and we could talk about here gender differences that arise in terms of cultural participation. Differences also in productivity, because remember, we said that education is a way of characterizing generally skills. How skillful you are understanding the symbolic meanings that are present in any type of cultural good. So this explains, for instance, in the framework of migrants, as you may have, and if you have not read, then ask your teachers about the contribution by Alessandra and Enrico, recently published in the Journal of Cultural Economics, that somehow an extension or some modifications of this basic framework are enough or are, well, sufficient in order to explain some differences in the behavior of different migrants, for instance, by country of origin. Yeah. So differences in productivity, meaning that if you don't quite have the skills in order to understand a practice, a cultural practice, and to make the whole symbolic meaning out of something that you bought in the market, then you're not quite going to have a big participation. So your choice is going to be disengagement somehow. So here we've got the role of education, and it's not only the role of formal education, meaning schooling, but it's also the very important role of informal education. And informal education happens in many ways. For instance, when you're a child, you get exposed to these sort of things in the household, your family, your social groups transmit this. You get exposed to different things in terms of differences in religious or religious practices. And you can also get, of course, trained specifically for these cultural activities by means of artistic education. So applying the model, you can think about, we could make this think experiment, like saying, okay, if you want to attend a concert, you would need time and coincide in the schedule, you need transport to get there to the concert hall, but you can also somehow enjoy that music with records, CD, DVD streaming, or you can practice this yourself. But it's not only a question of prices of time. You can see that education, if you are attending a concert or just listening to a record, this might be not so demanding in terms of your specific cultural capital. But if you want to play an instrument, this is heavy. You have to be trained and you have to be good in order to make something which makes sense. So there are other considerations. And the first one is interdisciplinary analysis, and to recognize the limits of the toolkit of the economist. This is not a super bazooka, but this is one of the limits of silos thinking. So actually, I think that it's absolutely essential that economists, when dealing with this sort of approximations, take into account the contributions that come from other social sciences. Then, well, how economists have been dealing with some limits, or how we have been trying to do our best in order to incorporate different aspects. The first has to do with social interactions, and with a better understanding of culture, which is a very elusive and very difficult to grasp concept, but it's essential for us, and how it deals, for instance, how it relates with identity. Akerlof and Crampton are the pioneers, or the authors of some seminal contributions talking about identity, but also early socialization. Then social effects, what we call peer effects, they are relevant in teenage behavior. They explain pretty well, and some cultural economists have explained, for instance, video gaming and video gaming consumption in terms of these peer effects. But also social effects and peer effects are absolutely relevant when we consider cultural goods. Cultural goods lie in the realm of what's called experience goods. So you've got fully uncertain of which going to be the utility that you are going to derive from reading poetry by Benedetti from Uruguay, in Spanish, till you just open and you go through it, And actually, it's quite difficult to assess the quality, even if you consider he writes always the same, and I will enjoy it as much as I did with the poems that got edited 2 years ago. This is absolutely brand new, right? And this means that this uncertainty is also modeling how people relate with this cultural participation and cultural goods demand. So there are many prescriptors. There are prescriptors. Before, it was when going to the movies, you were waiting Friday to read what was said about the movies that were opening in the movie theater. Now, well, you rely, for instance, in these word of mouth effects and social network effects and facts and bandwagon effects, and even the conspicuous consumption, because when consuming some of these cultural participation goods or these cultural participation experiences that are in the highbrow, in the high end of the legitimate culture, there is some signaling and there is some conspicuous consumption, as coined by Veblen. Then there are also social norms, and social norms are important when describing behavior, for instance, gender effects, and how social presence of women or other groups are in different societies according to their ways of seeing the world, religion meaning. Then also there are some omnivorous and omnivorous consumption things, and also there are many determinants that have to do with technology adoption. So sources of data, going quickly. If you want to have some international perspective of this, EUROSTAT has the EU survey of income and living condition, which actually it's very relevant also in order to shape risk of poverty, risk of being left behind under some dimension. And then there is an ad hoc module in 2006, 2015. Then Eurobarometers. If you are not to, if the analysis is quite descriptive, then Eurobarometers are a really useful source of information. And of course, big national surveys, in Italy, the ones coming from Istat in Daggio Mutoscope. And then alternatively, we've got household budget surveys in order to know in which different goods different households are spending. And then it's quite easy to identify in terms of the nationality of the head of the household, for instance. Time use surveys, but time use surveys actually are bad treated by national statistical offices. So it's a pity. And there are, of course, these challenges of cross-national research and comparisons. For migrants, the big challenge is measuring what counts. Yeah. Related questions with cultural participation. Now we will come back to migrants at the end of the presentation. The digital divide. The digital divide is something real, and it's something that we have seen in action during the different lockdowns. It affects the possibilities of getting educated for children, of getting more or less productive for us as workers, students in higher education institutions, and so on. So it's a question before saying that what happens, physical access to cultural goods has been impossible, and it's been access through ready-made products, books, records, whatever, but also this digital access. And it's not a clear question, and economists are still finding like regularities or a better analysis, a finest analysis of whether if there are complement or substitutes. If digital access is going to create a market then for live participation, or if there is going to be a replacement of one by the other, saying that there would be some cannibalization, and there is like a trend that digital and access will cannibalize presence. And of course, there are very, very relevant questions in terms of inequality. Inequality happens in cultural participation, and it happens a lot. And this is a big challenge for policies and for cultural policies, because cultural policies, at the end of the day, one of the stated aims, for instance, in Spain, is to grant equal access of citizens to culture or to their cultural heritage, if we think about this. Or and then we go to the data and we find systematically that there are disengaged people, that there are people that are left behind, and well, this effective access to culture is an issue. Then, well, post-COVID world, the digital divide. This is a writer, and she had a Spanish writer, and she had a very nice interview in El País this weekend, and she was saying, at the end of the day, siamo poveri with iPhone and Netflix, but we are, what happens with our cultural consumption and our cultural divide? And not only skillful people in terms of digital competences, so it's not a question about digital access, about the rates of penetration of who gets access to bandwidth. It's not a question of equipment, because the equipment has turned so cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And at the end of the day, the capacity that we have in our handy phones is superior to anything that we had before. It's a question of usage, of the intensity and the productivity of the usage that we do with our technologies. And this is also remarkable and can be a problem with migrants coming from different backgrounds and different groups. The rate of technological adoption, and the technological adoption, not that they have the access to broadband at their home places, or that they have a powerful small machine in their pockets, but the productive usage that they make of this. So there are many different dimensions of the digital divide, and they are here to stay, right? Probably under a changing appearance, but if there were problems in terms of access, equity in access, digital access probably is not going to solve this. Just some figures coming from EUROSTAT for EU27 and then all these countries that are also there. Internet access of households, comparing the red line for the year 2014, the blue line for 2019, highlighted here in Spain. But we can see that, roughly speaking, in 2019, these are very, very big. There are country differences, but this is converging to a 90-something, to the 100% access of broadband. Although if you go to these rural, urban, and you go on identifying where are the dark areas, there are indeed dark areas, but then going to the frequency of internet users, there are big differences. There are big differences, and we end up with countries such as Bulgaria that daily usage of internet is, well, roughly speaking, around 60%, which is not so high. And then for selected cultural activities, talking about this digital participation, we've got reading online news sites, newspapers and magazines, watching internet stream TV or video, listening to music, for instance, web radio, or playing or downloading video games, and how this is quite different for different European countries. So there are differences, and some of these, they are here to stay if we were going to the detail of who is doing what. Okay, so digital and live, what we considered before, these possibilities of market or what happens. So this is related also with somehow the Bowie theory, yeah? This is you'd better be prepared to do a lot of touring, because that's really the only unique situation that's going to be left. This applies to many contexts, but also this was the context of the music business is going digital. We don't sell records anymore. So how are we going to make a living out of it, even if we are the superstars? So for months, the only possibility to access cultural contents and creation was digital. So is this here to stay? And something that could be interesting was in the pre-COVID situation, using data from Spain, different researchers from the University of Oviedo, they wanted to see who are typically the consumers that declare that they are going digital because, for instance, they didn't have enough supply around where they lived, right? This applies, or they had some impeding condition, like saying disabilities. People with disability, probably they are not so active, or according aging, and aging is a big challenge for European societies. So you are not so active, and this going out and staying late since 7 to 8 to 10 or to 11, this is a problem, right? So digitization still is not broadening the access to those that claim that life attendance, they are facing some barriers in terms of lack of supply and lack of physical resources in order to have this sort of participation. And then these digital legal or illegal forms, and the problem of pirates. Pirates are coming, and how pirates turned into subscribers over the last 20 years. There has been some research done in Spain, also covering these sort of things. And it's difficult to establish the net effect of digitization in terms of who wins. For sure, people that were, or the part of the phonographic industry that was selling records and DVDs, well, they had bad years, but they had also bad years just after very good years, because the change of CD was so important that many people replaced their whole discotheques from vinyl and other supports to CDs, right? So probably the big good years were also derived by some technological distraction, for the good and then for the bad. So it's quite difficult to establish the net effect of digitization. Looking at participation, probably consumers benefited by access to the zero price. They did sampling, as I did before, being an experience good. This is good, right? So I listen to this, I feel that I like it, so I go and I buy the album. I listen to this, I feel that I like it, so as soon as this guy is performing and is touring live, I buy a ticket, even if it's very high. But there could be some dynamic effect, so less production, lack of diversity. And now saying some words, because well, I wouldn't like to run out of time if there are questions that could be very good to handle them or open a short debate. So what happens with migrants? Migrants, meaning that first in the 80s and 90s, both Italy and Spain, we are countries that started receiving migrants not such a long time ago. Actually, they were rich in terms of inner migration, with still important territorial tensions in the case of Spain, at least. And we were senders of migrants to wealthier countries in Central and Northern Europe. Right, so, but this is so typically when the suburbs of our cities got packed with satellites, meaning that this was the way of getting access to this cultural participation of migrants and get a connection with their origins. But this one is about intangible cultural heritage. So these are people from Bolivia. Bolivia is one of the countries in Latin America which has a highest endowment in terms of UNESCO intangible declarations, and they have carnivals. But this is a Bolivian carnival in Madrid last year. Yeah, so this is another thing. And then there are libraries. Libraries are from the cultural policy point of view, have been the best institutions integrating and creating and taking care of migrants. So migrants, first the measurement. The measurement is not pretty accurate, so probably we are not measuring well relevant cultural practices. First, in Spain, it's really difficult. The best that you can do is go to the big survey of cultural participation in Spain. And since there is one question like saying you're a national of Spain, you've got a double nationality, or you are a foreigner, you can use this as a control, or you can see differences. So this is not really informative. But then typically we measure very legitimate and Eurocentric ways of cultural participation. We ask people whether they go to the cinema, whether they go to the theater to listen to classical music. We ask them about things that, well, might be they might be indifferent. And indifferent in the sense that they have not been socialized with that. Those symbols are just meaningless for them. But there are also some barriers to participation. Migrants have, well, when talking about migrants, of course, the origin makes everything. You can be a highly skilled worker coming from another European country, you're a migrant. Yeah, so, but thinking about groups that are in danger of being left behind or that are suffering from problems of integration, then these problems, they translate in terms of barriers to participation. Then when we were talking about the specific human capital, well, one obvious barrier can be language skills. But there might be also barriers in terms of digitization and digital skills, not so much in terms of penetration rates, because actually when these migrants are still having a background in their home societies, they have a quick connectivity, even if they have families, yeah, and they are. This is clear in the case of women migrants here in Spain who are caretakers. And well, this, of course, there is lots to be done in terms of these local and origin cultural practices, because intangible cultural practices, these are the communities. Yeah, the communities of practices in terms of UNESCO. So as soon as there are, let's say, 40 Bolivian women in Madrid, there is a chance to recreate, probably also to enrich from a different point of view, this communitarian intangible heritage. But at the same time, this panorama of the big satellites in the suburbs, they have changed, but now migrants have more opportunities to consume in their menu also local, right? They are not so subject to any of these acculturization processes in which they might only have access to the local, to the host society's legitimate culture. So migrants have access to cultural contents via public libraries. We did I did, together with Ana Villarroya, for this compendium of cultural policies and trends, a research on the changing role of culture of libraries due to digitization, and also how libraries were used to overcome societal challenges, and how they offered different services and how they attracted. And actually they are like, they did it pretty well. This is the image here at the bottom. This is a project that is called an intercultural library in Andalusia in Spain. And they have a big population coming out from Morocco, on children of Morocco's workers and migrants, or migrants' children themselves. And then, well, public libraries, well, there is a hope from big data in order to know how integrative or how segregated different places in our cities are. People in MIT are doing the Atlas of Inequality, and one of the outcomes of the Atlas of Inequality is to track, for the time being only for Boston and several big cities in the United States, to see the places where people meet, controlling for the origins. The origins is quite easy to track, origins meaning where they live, right? And we are very segregated, and typically migrants, they live together. Yeah, there are like, well, the possibilities of accessing to housing are limited in some spaces, so they try that they gather together. We could track if these, which cultural spaces are more integrative in terms of the representation of people coming from those neighborhoods, or where. And then the impacts of cultural participation. Quite a long time ago, probably as 15 years ago, Bruno Frey, he is another of the fathers of this cultural economics approach, wrote something, and he presented it in San Leo in a workshop in Italy. And the provocative title was, "Do the muses make you happy?" And well, cultural participation, why do people at all participate? Well, probably because they want to be happier, right? So the contribution of cultural participation in terms of how it increases your life satisfaction, happiness, your mood, whatever, should be there. But it's also claimed that cultural participation is good in order to improve health conditions. Actually, in some national security systems, in the United Kingdom, this is called social prescribing. So instead of taking drugs, why don't you try to join a theater group in order to overcome your depression, or to impede your decay in terms of cognitive and social abilities, because now you are retired, and much better that instead of just staying there and becoming overweight, you get engaged in something which is cultural. So there could be benefits there. I would say could be, and now I will refine this. Also, in terms of improvement of performance and productivity of people, the Mozart effect. Take your children to music classes, they will become genius, and this will increase their capabilities, and not as if you were taking them to play football, whatever. Social cohesion. Cultural participation, the more the merrier, the more participants, the better the society, because you could build up some social capital, enhance trust, increase associative life, increase the creation of common symbols, and also improve the attractiveness of the places. Yeah? If there is a big cultural participation, then supply will try to match them, and there would be a very flourishing cultural life. Okay, so these are probably hypotheses, like saying, it shouldn't be the case that cultural participation is harmful for your happiness. It shouldn't be the case that cultural participation is bad for your health. It shouldn't be the case that your child is strictly worse off if he doesn't. So, looking for the evidence, and looking for the evidence because we would like to find evidence of causal relationship. Because if there is a call for public intervention and for public policy, we would like that the measures have an effect, right? This is treatment and effect. So we've got, as economists, big hopes on what's called the credibility revolution. The credibility revolution, this was the basis for awarding the Nobel Prize in Economics to Flor Branti and Michael Kremer just a couple of years ago. So the credibility revolution is reaching cultural participation studies in the sense that there are finest ways of knowing about the determinants and the reasons why. Yeah, the reasons why. So in order to assess to what effect and through which mechanisms cultural participation is increasing happiness or the life satisfaction or the health conditions of people, and is improvement performance, or is improvement labor market outcomes, and the social prescribing, or when dedicating and trying to integrate better migrants through means of these cultural projects and cultural participation projects, whether if this has beneficial effects over some outcomes of interest. So, conclusions, and now trying to end the presentation and the arguments. Economists, we can explain pretty well differences in behavior due to differences in resource availability. So when having a say, that's me as an economist giving classes, yeah. So these differences due to resource availability, differences in money, but saying that migrants are left behind because they are poor is absolutely unsatisfactory. So just reducing the price of these goods or giving out tokens or giving out entries or books, whatever, is not going to be part of the solution by itself. Rather, the big barrier has to do with lack of matching of these skills, specific skills that are required for this cultural participation, social barriers, and well, we are not so good explaining a big part of this picture that explains the cultural behavior of some groups of the population. So the challenge is that it's so difficult to define and to measure culture that many times it could be the case that we are measuring some cultural practices which are absolutely meaningful and relevant for a part of the population, the ones doing the survey design, and even in that general population, there are many people that are absolutely disengaged because of lack of interest, and the best predictor of this lack of interest is the level of education. And we need, as an economist, to do collaborative research. The good news is that we are developing these useful tools to learn what works. At the small scale, it can be experiments and randomized controlled trials. So this means that when cultural projects are designed with this aim that we would like to reach this group of migrants in order to increase their cultural participation, you need to control, and you need to assign also to that intervention a bit of monies or resources, or cooperate with university researchers, and you have to take risk in order to design experiments, let's say a randomized controlled trial, which is the golden standard or something like that, but you need to assess the evidence. Yeah. And then, well, larger scale, we should be getting better treatment of large data sets in order to assess causality, matching methods, whatever. And also there are big hopes with big data. Big data, for instance, user-generated data. It could be the case that we are trying to measure these very legitimate ways of culture, but there are lots of cultural participation and creation, as we said before, when presenting the ICET model, which is the standard for cultural participation in the European Union. Well, we should start browsing user-generated data by different people and different groups of people, and identify where are the prescriptors in these migrant groups and where these diverse voices are. Because otherwise, we are just probably trying to do good in a very ineffective way. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Victoria, thank you very much for your, you have passed everything. So thank you very much. You have cited so many things. I have just a small question. I think that Enrico has many, but I want to take this occasion. You see, you mentioned at the end that the consumption of cultural good, even passive or active, has benefits. And there is thousands of research on this field, on the effect on health, the effect on well-being, effect of socialization, and so on. So after reading all these results, I am convinced that probably the model that we use, the Becker model that we use, is not sufficient, because this type of quality, the consumption of cultural good is producing in people, increase their soft skill. The soft skill with the hard skill become part of the human capital that allows them to move in a better job. So I think that what we always say, that the people has a budget constraint and a time constraint, educational constraint, is reversed by the effect. So I would like a comment on you, because I'm unhappy with the Becker model. It is especially for the foreigner, because for the native you can say that is more enjoyment, more utility, leisure time, even if for the migrant is not, is much more than them, because they understand the culture of the country destination. I would say cultural integration in the past was considered something that was taking place in the future. First, they need economic integration. After cultural integration, that when they have the citizenship, they go and vote. But now, instead, I am convinced of the reverse. If we want economic integration, we should have first cultural integration. I would like a comment on you.
Well, how these skills can be modeled. Of course, the basic version model just offer a toolkit. Now it's our challenge to develop it or put the ingredients. Of course, yes, if I am a migrant and I go to the cinema to watch Spanish movies every week, my skills first, this is a learning by consuming process, yeah? So I will become more skillful. It's not, I get more educated, and then I will get language skills, and these skills are transferable, yeah? Are transferable, and it's not only that I need a degree to have a good job, but I need also to show that I can work as a team, so that my soft skills are relevant, and that I'm not only a proficient in the language, but if you make a joke, there won't be a misunderstanding, and we will start this sort of thing. But it's a question of, well, I wouldn't blame Becker. It's not because I'm an idol, but human capital, we are so bad representing human capital, and we are so bad representing skills that many times we just limit to formal education, and this is a minimum, of course, yeah. But also informal education and these soft skills, and there are still some avenues, like saying, okay, then think about things like personality, and try to measure the big fives, but this is also so insufficient. So everything is very fragmented. And of course, as a researcher, what cultural economists can say is, first, establish the limits, and the limits, for instance, of cultural policies, like saying, subsidize, reduce VAT. This is going to be absolutely ineffective. Give entries for free. They are not going to come here. Give free tickets for the opera. They are out of place. There are so many codes and so many soft skills that are required in order to enjoy and to be there, that if the code is an absolutely different language, we shouldn't be expecting those measures to work. Education. But education, soft integration, or offering programs, libraries, very basic proximity cultural infrastructure. You don't need big cultural infrastructure, big cultural capital, big investment.
No, in this case, it's active participation, like you make them in a course, or you use sport, football team, you see this type of activity in which they can very rapidly approach get closer to the cultural destination. I know that Enrico wants to ask you something.
Happy.
Yes, I don't know if there is still time, but I was very happy that you mentioned identity economics by Cranton and Akerlof, because I always thought that this quite recent approach, trying to add identity values in an agent utility framework, can somehow be useful in cultural economics, in understanding behavior in cultural practices. But so far, in my opinion, it has been very difficult to be applied because it has been used for, especially for ethnic diversity or some more, I would say, deeper values, personal values. I would like just to comment in your opinion how identity economics or this approach can be extended in cultural economics better and possibly more related to migrants, because I think, well, I have just the idea, but never been able to explore more. But
first, this is my personal point of view, one of the most fruitful theoretical frameworks that are being developed. This is so attractive for multicultural societies, for many researchers. So probably let's wait, and people doing mathematical economics and doing the theory, there will be some predictions. So if the assumptions, it might be a useful opportunity to test some of the predictions that are being derived. Of course, not by the seminal Akerlof-Cranton paper, but with different developments. Yes, and also to have some long-term perspective, right? With culture and religion, Alberto Visin is doing, well, he is now with Jared Rabin doing this combination of religion and cultural outcomes, which I find that, well, this is amazing, yeah? So, but yeah, identity should be there. It's very important for intangible cultural heritage. Now that there is intangible cultural heritage is in my research agenda, and languages, language acquisition, minoritarian languages, and the willingness of different groups to acquire, and this in multilingual societies such as the Spanish one. I teach in the University of the Basque Country. We teach in Basque, in Spanish, and in English, but Basque is an issue, yeah? And this language economics. There are contributions, yeah? And I like also, by the way, in this language, social big data, there are some initiatives of this language and language proximity in terms of these digital humanities, which and digital social sciences that will bring us, I think, amazing developments in order to incorporate things that are hard to measure, right? I think that you have dealt with these metrics or this mapping of linguistic distance in order to characterize differences in the skills and differences in the human capital, or in this measure of productivity for different agents. So it's there should be collaborative research for sure.
I know that your time for us is exhausted, that you are busy with another engagement at 3. So we would like really to thank you very much. And I know that this conversation will continue. This is just one step in the discussion that will continue on this field. And we hope to have an occasion to work together in some project.
That would be wonderful, yeah? European opportunities should be there in order to enrich different visions and different disciplines. Hello, Chiara, I saw that you are there, so nice to see your name around. And thank you very much for this opportunity in order to think out of the box, because otherwise having just talking to your own students, well, we try to replicate ourselves, and it was very interesting. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed from everybody. Thank you.